Imagine you're screaming for help in the middle of the night. You can see lights turning on in nearby apartments. Curtains move. People are awake. They hear you, but nobody comes. Nobody calls the police. Nobody helps. And then you die. For decades, this terrifying story became one of the most famous crime cases in American history. A young woman brutally attacked outside her home while dozens of witnesses supposedly watched and did nothing. Her name was Kitty Genovese, and her murder changed the way psychologists understood human behavior forever. But what really happened that night? Was America told the full truth? Or was the story far more complicated than anyone realized? Tonight, we're diving deep into one of the most disturbing and controversial murders in modern history. Catherine Susan Genovese, known to friends and family as Kitty, was born in Brooklyn, New York in 1935. She grew up in a loving Italian-American family and was known for her bright smile, confidence, and kindness. Friends described her as energetic, independent, and ambitious. By 1964, Kitty was 28 years old and living in the Kew Gardens neighborhood of Queens, New York. Kitty Genovese. She worked as a manager at a local bar and was respected by co-workers and customers alike. Kitty had dreams. She wanted a successful future. She wanted happiness. She wanted a normal life. But she never imagined that she would become one of the most famous murder victims in American history. It was Friday night. Actually, the early morning hours of March 13th, 1964. New York City was mostly quiet. At around 2:30 a.m., Kitty finished her shift and began driving home. The streets were nearly empty. The city lights reflected off wet pavement. Everything seemed normal. As she parked her red Fiat near her apartment building, she noticed something. A man standing nearby, watching, waiting. His name was Winston Moseley, a 29-year-old married man, a man hiding a dark secret. Winston Moseley. Kitty got out of her car and started walking toward her apartment. Then suddenly, Moseley began following her. At first, she tried to ignore him, but as his footsteps grew closer, fear began rising inside her. Then he attacked. Without warning, Moseley lunged forward and stabbed Kitty. The knife struck multiple times. Kitty screamed, "Oh my God! He stabbed me! Help me!" Her cries echoed through the neighborhood. Lights came on. Windows opened. Someone shouted from above. The attacker briefly fled. For a moment, it looked like Kitty might survive. Bleeding heavily, Kitty tried desperately to reach safety. She staggered toward the rear entrance of her apartment building. Every step was agony. Blood stained the walkway. She was injured, terrified, alone. Meanwhile, Winston Moseley sat in his car nearby. He wasn't finished. After waiting several minutes and seeing no police arrive, he returned. Think about that. The attacker came back. Because he believed nobody was stopping him. Kitty had collapsed near a doorway. She was weak, barely conscious. Then Moseley attacked again. This second assault was even more brutal. He stabbed her repeatedly. He sexually assaulted her. And then he left her dying on the floor. The attack had lasted over half an hour. A young woman fought for her life, while desperately hoping someone would save her. But for Kitty, help came too late. At approximately 3:15 a.m., she died from her injuries. She was only 28 years old. A few days later, newspapers exploded with headlines. One article changed everything. Published in the newspaper known as the New York Times, the story claimed something unbelievable. 38 witnesses had watched the murder. 38 people had heard screams. 38 people had done absolutely nothing. No calls, no intervention, no help. America was horrified. How could this happen? How could so many people hear someone begging for help and simply ignore it? The public was furious. Psychologists became fascinated. The story quickly spread across the world. Kitty Genovese's murder became a symbol of human indifference, a symbol of what happens when people assume someone else will act. The case became so influential that psychologists eventually created a term for this phenomenon: the bystander effect. Bystander effect. The idea suggests that when many people witness an emergency, each individual feels less personal responsibility to help. Everyone assumes someone else will do something, and as a result, nobody acts. While the public debated the witnesses, detectives focused on one thing: finding the murderer. Investigators soon received a crucial tip. A witness had noticed suspicious behavior connected to Winston Moseley. Police began watching him. What they discovered was horrifying. Moseley wasn't just a killer. He was a serial predator. When questioned, he calmly confessed, not only to Kitty's murder, but to several other violent crimes. Detectives were stunned. He described the attack in chilling detail, with almost no emotion, as if he were discussing an ordinary day. During his trial, prosecutors painted a picture of a man driven by violent fantasies. The evidence was overwhelming. The jury found him guilty. Initially, he was sentenced to death. Later, that sentence was reduced to life imprisonment after legal changes regarding capital punishment. For the rest of his life, Winston Moseley remained one of America's most infamous killers. He died in prison in 2016. But here's where the story takes an unexpected turn. Years later, journalists and researchers re-examined the case, and they discovered something surprising. The famous story wasn't entirely accurate. Not 38 people watched the entire murder. Many witnesses only heard fragments of the attack. Some thought it was a domestic argument. Others couldn't clearly see what was happening. Several people did try to help. Some shouted at the attacker. One person called police. Another rushed to Kitty's side during her final moments. The reality was more complicated than the headlines suggested. The media had simplified the story, perhaps even exaggerated parts of it. Yet despite these corrections, one fact remained undeniable. A young woman desperately needed help, and the response was tragically inadequate. More than 60 years later, the name Kitty Genovese is still remembered, not only because of the crime, but because of the questions it forces us to ask. Would we help? Would we call emergency services? Would we step forward when someone is in danger? Or would we assume someone else will do it? The murder of Kitty Genovese became a turning point in psychology, journalism, and public awareness. Her death inspired new research, new emergency response systems, and a deeper understanding of human behavior. But behind all the studies, behind all the headlines, was a real person, a daughter, a sister, a friend, a woman whose life was stolen in a brutal act of violence, and whose story continues to remind the world that sometimes the difference between life and death is a single person choosing to act. If this story shocked you, leave a comment below and tell us. What would you have done if you heard Kitty's cries for help? Don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more dark true crime stories that changed history. And remember, sometimes the scariest part of a crime isn't the killer. It's the silence,